All right, all right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
Uh, we have, I believe, screwed up because we didn't do one of these in March. So,
Yeah, actually, this should have well been done in March, but
uh, uh, so yeah, quick note, behind the scenes note, we have resolved to try to do something once every Wednesday, so we're semi regular and be good YouTubers. But um, that'll last about 2 weeks, I'm sure. Anyway, we have, I think, four principal items to talk about
mhm.
tonight. Uh, and in no particular order, the front and what's happening there, because that's depressing, and behind the lines in various Ukrainian cities, because that's also depressing. And the terrorist attack in Moscow, the aftermath of which has been incredibly depressing. Um, and well, the discussion today in Congress about Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries. It's
To start off,
not
one
been great.
wins wars. One wins wars by attacking refineries. That's actually one way that you know Ukraine can really put a hurting on Russia. And for the life of me, I don't know why there's that fear. Because on one end, and this is why I really hate a lot of Washington right now on both sides of the political divide. Like, on one end, there's a tremendous effort from the very beginning when this started, to keep fueling the war. And then now you're limiting Ukraine's ability to fight and actually hit the Russians where they need to be hit. It's through destroying oil refineries and things like that that you actually win wars. And so for whatever reason, what it tells me is that I don't think that a lot of people in Washington, like your Lindsey Grahams, all your neocons, neolibs, I don't think that they really want Ukraine to win this. They say that they do, but it's more, I think, to line their pockets. And I believe this from the very start. And I think that they would have tried to do more before this spilled out of control. They could have tried to do more to actually, diplomatically prevent this. But I mean, we've well past that point. We've well past that point. So now, to me, the very audacity that they would have to dictate what Ukraine may or may not target, and Ukraine's using its own weapons to target these refineries. They're not using our technology. They're not using ATACMs or HIMARS or anything like that. They're using their own homemade drones.
Sure,
Sometimes actually converting like prop planes into drones
sure.
to do this.
Yeah, I don't think that's the principal issue that Washington is concerned about. I think the principal issue that Biden is concerned about here is oil prices, um, and I think that's bullshit. Uh,
It is bullshit because yeah, now it's a thing. He now it's the problem.
well, it's an
Huh?
election year, and
Right
that's
when
why
he's
it's a
right when
problem.
he yeah right when he's facing an election that he's probably going to lose. Let's face it. Um,
It's too early to say.
yeah, but
The problem is here's my principal issue here. Targeting the refineries is incredibly effective for Ukraine. Um, and before you explode, let me finish because I know you're going to be upset when I say this. The thing is, the economic factor is not necessarily enough to kind of like if the oil refinery is directly fueling Russian troops, like the refinery is going from refinery to front. Yes, it's absolutely a target. If you look at the Allied strategic bombing in World War II, what are they targeting? They're targeting factories that have been identified, or they're targeting ancillary facilities to factories that have been identified to be supporting the war effort.
of
Um,
course,
the problem with the refineries is not all of them are supporting the war effort directly. perhaps indirectly, but that might be an issue. And like I can see that being a problem. But by the same token, Russia, and what we're also going to talk about tonight is Russia has not given a flying crap about not targeting civilian infrastructure. Ukraine probably doesn't feel that they have to give a flying crap about that. And in fairness, the oil refineries are borderline. Like it's hard to make a
Yeah,
case about an economic target.
of course. No,
It,
I'm not. I don't disagree with you, but
but
you
yeah,
know,
you're right. They are using their own weapons. They're not using any capabilities that we have given them. Um, I think the thing of it enriching the United States is secondary. I don't think Biden knows. Biden is not forceful in foreign policy. You see that with Israel. You see that with Afghanistan. You see that with Ukraine. He is not decisive. Um, so, for example, a decisive move would have been to turn around and say, if Russia invades Ukraine, we'll send troops in, because that would have made Putin think twice. All the way back in February 2022, it would have made him think twice. He
I
would have
think
had to
I
call
think
his
on
bluff.
I think honestly, there's very few people in Washington, and part of the reason too is actually there's a lot of probably the vast majority of advisors or advising agencies, third party organizations are would you know basically argue against doing that, right? I mean,
Sure.
that was the whole sort of mantra of their thinking. Don't try to poke the bear, the proverbial bear. But yeah, I mean, it's the thing that has actually kind of surprised me recently is sort of the turn that Macron has taken. And at first, I thought it was actually absolute craziness, and I then started to think about it though, and I'm thinking, if France put a few battalions of their troops in Chernihiv Oblast, I probably feel pretty good about that because it would be less likely for them to come into that region again. That would make me feel very good.
I don't.
Um,
I I think we all collectively, but especially Europe, should be in a position to start putting their money where their mouths are. Uh,
they're not going to do that.
they're
I don't think
not.
anyone's going to do that,
I
and that's
like,
the sad part of all of this.
and I think there's a risk. I think there's a long term geopolitical risk to this. Uh, Obviously, this situation is exacerbated immensely by the inability of Republicans in Congress to un-Russify themselves and get aid to Ukraine. And that's a huge thing that remains a problem. But like, I think there's a risk in allowing Russia to blackmail Europe into not resisting, and a risk to not fighting now. Uh,
There's
we've
a risk to it. At the very minimum, the way I look at this, I we have our differing opinions on it. I believe that this could have been solved, probably before it broke out, and I think even during the Turkish talks, it could have been solved too. We're well past that point now, and what I believe at least needs to be done is that Ukraine needs to be, they need to sustain Ukraine's defense. I think that we're past the point, at least in the near term, and probably even in the long term at this point, of Ukraine being able militarily to return a lot of the areas that it has lost. But we can certainly keep Ukraine fighting and keep them actually from dying and eventually this sort of becoming like a possible, Korea scenario.
well,
But, go ahead.
a draw is a
It's not
draw is
ideal. It's not what I would want,
a
but
draw is a win for Russia ultimately. Is
ultimately, yeah. But I mean,
the
it's
other
either that or you lose, completely lose.
yes, um So yeah, like absent anyone come, I agree. Absent something major shifting for Ukraine's favor, I don't see how they change. I don't. They have to change the dynamic. They have to make warfare mobile again. They can't win this trench war. They can't. They can't. It's they're measuring these attacks, and they're not doing many attacks right now. That's kind of the situation at the front. I saw an estimate a couple days ago that Ukraine is outgunned by Russia 10 artillery shells to one, and this war and this trench this system is all about artillery fighting. They need artillery to break attacks. They need artillery to do attacks. Um, and you've seen a change in tactics too. We talked a little bit about this small units instead of these mass armor formations and whatnot. Russia sends out a squad. The squad has to be repelled. It's 1,000 little pinpricks into Ukraine's lines. Beat by beat, they're kind of getting bled dry. And you saw
It's the same attacks that Ukraine is resorting to as well.
Yeah,
That's kind of like
part of
how
it
their
is
counteroffensive evolved. It started off with some, attempted major attacks, but when they reached the defensive lines, it was obvious at that point that the sort of NATO style ground mobile tactics were not going to work for Ukraine. So they went back doing what actually worked. And I mean, they didn't gain that much, but they still saved a lot of their, equipment and lives, more importantly.
yeah. The problem is it's the problem of massing, right? You can't mass sufficient forces for those kinds of breakthrough attacks against that arrayed artillery and minefields. The minefields slow you down and let the artillery hit you. Basically,
Yeah,
you either get nailed in the minefield, or you get nailed in you get nailed by the artillery. It's the end of, well, basically all of it, right? You can't really do much. You have to go, and you see these reports about them fighting hedgerow by hedgerow, basically. Uh, and like by the same token, though, it's not like Russia is doing an amazing job taking territory either.
no, they're not, and
I
that's another thing about this is that the biggest threat that I see right now is Ukraine running out of its, it really needs air defense and it needs, as you said, artillery. Air defense, though, especially, I think, because
Yeah, we'll get into
the
that in a
big
hot
risk,
second.
yeah, the big risk is, uh, Russia's air force being able to become, more
Dominant.
too much to bear, yeah, to dominate the skies of Ukraine. And once that happens, the situation is, to put it mildly, fucked.
Yeah, I don't see a yeah, I like and there's kind of the thing, like the answer that changes the dynamic on the front line isn't any, like there's not a item that I could go into the catalogs of military equipment and say this is what they need. It's a whole it they're stuck. They don't have the mine clearing equipment, the air, they need everything at this point, like outside of
Yeah,
sustaining the defense. They need
which
mine clearing equipment
uh,
and troops.
honestly, the whole thing, which is why I think, I don't know, it's why I think that from the get go,
Hey, Titan.
this was going to be a problematic affair for Ukraine. It had a limit. It had an aged and very limited old Soviet stock. It burned through that pretty quick. I mean, it still has a little bit of it, but it's, and a lot of that, there should have been, some, there was no time, they were predicting this inevitability, Ukraine was, but the West was just kind of sitting on its ass. Like there should have been actual, like, some of the, like Slovakia, um, Poland, and some of the places that used to produce these 152 artillery shells and still had some of the infrastructure there to do it. They should have been doing it and building up a supply from the get go. I mean, you could definitely see that this was a potentiality, if not inevitable, after 2014. And supply came really too little too late. And now, it's hard to switch over to, like, in the middle of a war from your old kit to a new one that you don't have the infrastructure, really. I mean, they say that they're building the infrastructure in Ukraine, but that's routinely targeted. That's, still a problem, but they don't really have the infrastructure for all this Western equipment. And, now, finally, after so many, months of this conflict, we realize too that there's no real magic bullet. I remember when they were talking about how the Western tank kit was gonna, help Ukraine just break through Russian lines, and obviously that didn't happen. And I think that anyone who has observed wars, like, within the last at least 10 or 15 years, could have told you that.
Well,
you can see what happened. You can see what happened to, the Turks tried using their Leopard 2s, which are better tanks, granted than the Russian stock, but they're still easy targets for artillery and drones and ATGMs.
Yeah, I don't think the tank is really the issue here. Like, there are basically three classifications of observers of war: people who know what the fuck they're talking about. They're usually very quiet about things. People who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. And then people who have kind of an idea of what the fuck they're talking about, and they're the ones who get paid to go on cable news, that third classification. And the people who are saying, "Oh, the tank's going to change everything,"
I consider myself in that category, but yeah,
the people who are saying the tanks are going to change everything, or this weapon or that weapon will change everything, was Group 3, and they told that to Group 2, and Group 1 was like, "Wait, no, that's not right, stop," and then everyone was like, "No,
yeah.
Group 3 said otherwise." And then there's there's also Group 4, which is Scott Ritter and what's his face McGregor, who sit there twiddling their thumbs and saying Russia has destroyed the Ukrainian army 16 times today.
Yeah, no. So yeah, you got all those, all four of those groups.
Yeah. Oh damn it, Avery! Come on, this is very inconvenient. Sorry. The other half of this equation is Kharkiv. Russia is making a concerted effort to bomb it into oblivion, and that's kind of where the principal air defense issue is right now. And I'm going to put the map there, and then I need to take Avery out, and I will be back. You get to entertain chat while I'm gone.
Good. Hello, Tikas. Hello, Titan.
Stop! You're not.
I imagine he did, and knowing him, he probably talked about how stupid the term game changer is. I mean, we have to kind of face the reality of it that, like, a piece of equipment, say like an F-16, even with all its updated avionics, it's not going to change the game for Ukraine. And that's kind of one of my big, it's one of the things that bothers me about this conflict so much, is because like, there's not that game changer. There's not really a way to give Ukraine a piece of equipment that's going to help it retake all of its lost territory. That ship is sailed, and I think that that's hard to take, but it's sailed. I believe that Russia's ship of taking all of left bank Ukraine is sailed, but I mean, I don't think it's entirely sailed. Maybe it's many miles off port, but I think it's still a problem. If we can get them the air defense that they need and artillery, I think that through attrition, the situation will become deadlock and a stalemate, and hopefully it'll freeze. And freeze, when I say freeze, I mean like Korea level freeze, where there's the opportunity to rebuild. Ukraine can integrate itself into the EU. NATO would be off the question, but, you know, hopefully there's some other, you know, by other diplomatic means, we can give them some sort of security guarantees. I just, you know, I don't know. This whole conflict enrages me. I know all of you that follow us know that. And I believe it could have been prevented. And I'm not saying, like, you know, people, when I tell that to them, it's like, oh, then you're just giving in to Putin. And, you know, I'm not advocating that. What I'm saying is that, you know, a bad peace is better than a good war. And this is not a good war. This has turned out way more bloody, way more vicious than I ever thought it could be. And that's really hard for me. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to see, you know, where my family's from ever again, you know, to visit all of my friends in Ukraine. That's always, like, you know, in the forefront of my mind. So, yeah, this is just, it's so personal. Wish I had control over the screen at the moment. Daedalus, this is, which map is this? Do any of you guys in chat know which map that he has up? I forget. Is this shit? I forget which one it is. Live map. Yeah. Thank you, Bluestone. UA map. Tell me, guys, what do you think? You know, in the chat, what do you think is the likely outcome of this conflict? I mean, it's so hard to see ahead, but, you know, I want to, you know, like, I really, really want it to end, and I want it to end with Ukraine intact. I hate to say it, but I that's where the path is going, Chicas. Yeah, I think you're unfortunately right. I hope them winning, though, is them taking whatever the fuck that they took and just keeping it for however long time that they do. I hate to say it, but I can't have them, like, I will go absolutely ballistic if they take Chernihiv Oblast or Poltava Oblast or any of the places that I have most of my friends, my roots.
Hi, I'm back. No, you lay down now. You good.
Keeping them entertained.
Are we
Just
talking about
about
what happens if Russia wins? Well, I did some back of napkin math, and there are approximately 450, 460 cities in Ukraine that are large, not hamlets type. And if it takes Russia 10 years to take each city, the war should be over in some time in 2 to 3 millennia.
Yeah, no. I mean,
I'm being funny.
There's no scenario that I see where they take all of Ukraine. The issue to me is, like, you know, whether or not they take, you know, northeastern Ukraine, you know, whether or not they take the regions where most of the people I care about are. I can definitely see Lviv always being Ukraine unless Poland goes crazy and wants to take it back, which,
Well,
you know, I doubt that would happen, but you know, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility. Everything, you know, a lot of people thought this would never happen. So.
it depends. It really depends. I want to talk about Kharkiv because I think this is informative in a lot of ways about the Moscow terror attacks, and more specifically, why Russia is doing what it's doing about the Moscow terror attacks. Um, so Kharkiv has been the subject of attacks, drone attacks, and missile attacks from bombers extensively over the past couple weeks. Um, and it's interesting because you remember last winter they were firing at various cities in Ukraine all the time, right? Trying to take out their infrastructure and electric infrastructure in particular. Now they seem to be focused on this one city out as far as attacking behind the front line is concerned. And I think it's interesting to me because there have been attacks across the border into Belgrade, so I think that's part of it, and I think it's also speaking to the fact that Russia itself is having trouble with its long range strategic weapons like its missiles and its drones and keeping them in insufficient supply to do the widespread campaign they did last winter. So they've
I think that that's indicative of it for sure.
I think they've picked this city. It's close. It's easy to hit. The bombers have to go on no risk. They can fly out from their base a little ways, fire their missiles, and go back. And the drones don't have that long to fly. They don't. They could concentrate more of them, and they can hit the target. And it forces Ukraine to concentrate their defenses because they can't take defenses from another city and put it in Kharkiv unless they start hitting that other city. So they're kind of in a pickle as far as being able to deal with this in and of itself. I don't know how many people, like how many of the big social media figures from Ukraine you follow on Twitter, but I have seen someone like Anna talk about nightly attacks by Shahed drones are in her area. So like this is
I just talked to my friend Yulia, and she told me that she was living, outside of Kharkiv, and that she was seeing every day the
yeah,
drones and missiles go by.
the loitering munitions and the light whatnot.
Yeah, every day.
Uh, and so like that kind of brings us to Moscow last month. There was a significant terror attack conducted by ISIS, ISIS-K specifically, in Moscow. Gunmen walked into a crowded area, a theater, and started shooting. A theater, shopping center, etc. And they set some fires, and the whole thing turned into a giant cluster for Russia. Go ahead.
The first thing I did when I heard about this, it wasn't like I didn't have any reaction, oh, good, that this is happening to them too. Now, the first thing that I thought of was, are my relatives, because I have family in Moscow, are they okay? And the first thing I did was message all of them to see if they were all right. And I remember, I was talking to my cousin's wife, who is from Ukraine, from Melitopol, and very much pro-Ukrainian. And she said, I'm sure they will find some. When I asked her who did it, this is even before it was announced as ISIS, she said, I'm sure that they'll find some Ukrainian and blame it on them. So, she was partially right. Now they're actually making a very absurd claim that these
that
terrorists
is working with ISIS.
That Ukraine is working with ISIS, yeah. Oh, and they really worked these terrorists over. I mean, I don't know if you saw some of them.
Off on and live on TikTok. I saw.
I mean, with the rate that they beat them, I think that you could get them to say anything.
Well,
and that's definitely the proof. They cut off one guy's ear, savagely beat the other ones. Yeah.
Well, it's
it kind of reminds me a little bit of how the Bush administration tried to, you could tell that, these are two separate things, obviously two very separate things. Like 9/11 was very separate from a plan that was already in place to oust Saddam Hussein and invade Iraq. And immediately when one happens, you're trying to okay, how can we link one to the other? And that's, just a terrible coincidence, I guess. And one that we warned them about, though. We actually sent them intelligence that it was going to happen, and yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's I think the interesting bit. We told them what was going to happen. I had a very smart-ass remark when I read Russia saying, "I don't think ISIS has the sophistication to pull off this attack." I'm like, "What are you talking about? American schoolchildren figure out how to pull off these kinds of attacks all the time." But
I was just going to say,
it's nonsense. If we can do it, they surely can. And
of
that's the
course.
thing is ISIS-K is not in Ukraine, and Russia is having a hard time getting into Ukraine. So like I think there's a interesting thing at play here, whereas 9/11 happens and we go into Afghanistan and we do our thing there. And that can be an entire other discussion. But we're capable of doing that. Like the American response is there within weeks. We are deploying troops into Afghanistan and helping the Northern Alliance beat back the Taliban. Russia can't do that. They're at their limits. They're at their military capacity right now. They can't send a fleet all the way around to sail down to the Indian Ocean and into the Gulf. They can't do these things. They can't send an army across.
They really can't afford to launch any missiles.
Yeah, they can't afford to launch
to
missiles.
Afghanistan, or to the area where ISIS-K is. I mean, yeah, they can't even do that because they're too busy using those missiles to bombard Kharkiv.
And even if they weren't fighting Ukraine, they couldn't do these. They couldn't send their military out to be an expedition in the same way that into a hostile country to be an expedition in the same way the United States did. They don't have the power to fight ISIS, so they have no choice in the end to save face. They have to blame Ukraine. There's no other option available to them.
Imagine, here's my question to you, Daedalus. Do you think Russia's military, because we can look at just how many armored vehicles they've lost, how much of their missile inventory they've spent, and obviously they're producing more tanks, more IFVs, but they're significantly in a worse spot than they were 2 years ago before this all started. Which is why sometimes I find the whole argument is being used by politicians here. Politicians in Ukraine use it too, but I mean they're trying to drum up support when they say it. But I don't think, even if Russia wins this, depending on what a win would look like, I think that they're pretty spent for a while. It's going to take them a long time, and even if they win, they're going to face new economic, even more heightened economic sanctions. So those are going to bite soon. Hopefully next year. I mean, they're not in a good position. They're not in a great position to threaten the Baltic states or threaten NATO.
But you got to remember that there's what's a good idea and what is going to happen anyway. So for example, let's go back to our discussions you and I had before this started, when you were still in Ukraine. And I'm like, they're not going to invade. It's a stupid idea. I could see that it's a dumb idea militarily.
Yeah.
Russia could probably see it was a dumb. They did it anyway.
True. Yeah.
So it just because they'd lose doesn't mean they wouldn't. And
True. Yeah.
If you're not in a position to greet that attack with some resolve, and to be fair, if the Russians tried to attack the Baltic states, they would greet that attack. The Baltic states in particular would greet that attack in particular with great deal of resolve, and Poland would help. But the problem is that what Russia banks on, and this comes into Georgia too, South Odessa, and other problems. There's a show that was on the BBC in the 70s and 80s called Yes Minister, and then a sequel called Yes Prime Minister, and it details a fictional British cabinet minister's rise to power as prime minister. And the first episode of Yes Prime Minister is the hacker, the guy in question, being introduced to the United Kingdom's conventional and nuclear stance as prime minister, like what he's expected to do if war starts. And one thing leads to another, and he ends up bringing in an advisor to learn about things. And the advisor, it talks about salami tactics, slice by slice. And that's kind of like, that's what I think Ukraine's concern is about Russia.
Mhm.
That's what I think Ukraine's concern is, that they start a war now. They get the Crimea and Donetsk Oblast and the Luhansk, and then they stop, and then they wait 10 years, and then they start again. That's, I think, Ukraine's big concern at
No,
the
that's their
moment.
their big that's their big concern. But that also provided that um, provided that things go cold and there's not a lot of movement, that gives Ukraine time to prepare for that, to rearm, which you know
There's
that they would do that.
They would, but there's several major caveats to this.
Yeah.
The first is population. Ukraine has a population crisis now that they're having a hard time addressing. Um, they have to repatriate people. They have to get people in there going to be willing to fight. The second is that let's suppose that tomorrow the war resolves. The red areas on the map here turn into Russia, and everything else stays Ukrainian.
Okay.
And Ukraine decides we want to join NATO. There's not a clear path to that right now, right? Every current member of NATO has to agree to this. And Russia has its hooks in Hungary, which means that if they want to, they can delay through Orban indefinitely any kind of attempt for Ukraine to join NATO. So that they're still stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and they still have to worry about this starting again in 10 years. Like
Yeah.
that's Ukraine's only path to security, is joining NATO and being part of the alliance. And that's not likely to happen. Like we have to face a very serious problem here in the West, collectively Western Europe and the United States, is we have been very thoroughly infiltrated by individuals who are willing to, for money or power, advance Russia's interests. And we need to address
Of
that
course.
soon, or we're in deep trouble. Like
Yeah, I would agree with you.
that's underlining all of this, is that we are compromised in this effort. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been able to forestall by herself because of the rules that the House of Representatives created, and because Mike Johnson is not willing to risk his career on this.
Mhm.
She's been able to forestall. She's been able to single-handedly forestall the Ukraine aid. The other problem that Ukraine
Do you think
has.
Mike Johnson's going to give in soon to the neocons?
No, um, there is nothing to be gained. He has nothing to gain by giving in until the election. In fact, he will probably try to hold out longer. The other problem is, and to be perfectly blunt,
You don't see next week them passing the floor to vote and this all being resolved.
I don't. I wish it was. I've been very relentlessly pessimistic about the United States at the moment, and particularly Congress. Um, I, I very pessimistic. I don't think they're going to get it resolved. The other half of this problem is, and I would bring this up because again of our considerable overlap with Sunday's community, and I noticed discussion of Ukraine has effectively died off in most places that aren't directly devoted to it. So like a group that is like a Ukrainian YouTube channel, they'll keep the discussion going. But like for example, in the cathedral, we have that whole section on Ukraine, and Russia, and it has been what the last post was on the 5th.
Yeah.
Israel and Palestine has sucked all the oxygen that Ukraine needs to keeping people engaged and informed out of the room, and Israel has done it for a war that they've effectively lost. So, like,
I'm wondering if perhaps, I don't know, it wouldn't surprise me if there was some sort of prodding of Hamas to launch the attack when they did, by Russia, for example.
I don't know about that. It seems pretty clear that Hamas decided to do whatever the fuck it wanted in this case, because neither Iran nor Egypt were terribly interested in this thing occurring. And Egypt and
Hmm.
Iran being the principal backers of Hamas. Uh, I don't think that's the case, but I do think that Russia was willing to capitalize on it. You certainly seen Russia and China capitalizing on the situation in Yemen with the Houthis. And Iran has been well positioned to help them do that too. Um, yeah, that's fair, Titan. It has been a lot of there has been a lot of stasis in the situation. There's nothing dramatic to report, I would say. Uh, yeah, there's nothing dramatic, I would say. Yeah, but Russia hosting Hamas's leaders isn't necessarily indication that Russia prodded Hamas to launch the attack. Also, it's like Russia could not have possibly predicted that Israel would have reacted the way they did. They like as so far as like bad actions and like screwing the pooch, no one could have possibly thought that Israel was going to screw the pooch this heavily. Um, I didn't for sure. Like,
This is the first time I've heard that term, screw the pooch.
not the first time, or that's
This is the
really
first time.
in
This is the
34
first.
years.
I've never heard screw the pooch, and it's yeah.
Uh, I'm trying not to swear. They fucked up. That's what Israel did. They fucked their situation up, uh, possibly fatally, at least for Netanyahu and the Israeli far right.
It's a good thing if that's the case.
Well, yes, but then the guys who replaced them are only slightly less far right than the previous guys, so you know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the shills in the Ukrainian server, absolutely, and I was kind of the exception I was thinking of. The problem is that it's hard to generate. There are a number of competing crises right now for the broad community of online left. Uh,
Hmm.
um, the election being one of them, Palestine, uh, the ongoing thing with trans rights. All of these things are pulling a lot of energy, and obviously there are also some people on the online left, such as Voss or Xena and Poppy, who are being thoroughly unfucking productive right now in their efforts to be political advocates. So there yes, sir. Thank you very much. There are a lot of problems at the moment, like in getting the right attention at the right place. And by and large, the online right is almost unanimous in wanting to see Russia win. And then the people who aren't online don't seem to be speaking up. So we're in a bit of trouble.
No, we are.
Sounds like you're having a bit of trouble too. Um,
Oh, were you talking about the scream?
yes, that's why I'm glad I don't have any kids that I know of.
Yeah.
Very important that I know of. And that's, I think, that's that you need to go break something up real quick.
I'm surprised that my mic, like I got my headset on, then it's picking it up. That.
Uh,
Yeah.
yes, it's definitely effective there. These are not leftists; those are media influencers who can't spell leftist. Well, that's fair. Um, that's fair, Titan, I guess. Uh, however, they proclaim that they're leftists, and therefore people think that they're leftist. Um, and all yeah, they are pulling attention onto things that are like, how long did we spend talking about fucking Lolly? Like, was that really a productive discussion? I know I spent 5 minutes on it, but that was an exception for me. But you get my point. Like, things are happening in the world and we're not doing anything about it. And then that's not
No,
even getting into the whole bullshit about progressive victory. So, I mean, I get the problem, but like, I'm not sure that this is an effective avenue right now to speak about these things and have them heard and done something about. That doesn't it doesn't pull in the thing. And the best thing for the Russian pro Russia crowd right now is that no one is paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine. They've basically completely forgot about it in the face of the tragedy in Gaza. And that's fair. That's fair. The thing that's happening in Gaza is horrific. I don't want to minimize this. And what happened
no,
on
not at
October
all.
7th was horrific. I don't want to minimize that. But this is still here, and it's still big. And like, you just look at this map. Look at the cluster. All these shell reports, and that's just Russia hammering Ukraine over and over and over again. And it's not necessary. We've been doing this now for going on. What's going to be 2.5 years soon. It. Think about this. Compare it to this. In World War II, with the United States, that was never really under significant strategic threat, managed to mobilize an arsenal and an industry that armed the world to fight the Axis. And now, collectively, 80 years later, for some reason, we're scrounging for artillery shells.
Yeah, no,
It,
it's pitiful. At the same time, too, though, in World War II, and in the leading even up into our entry into the war, the industry and the economy was so much more geared towards it. And it's hard to pitch this to the American people. It's far away. Most Americans before this started had never even couldn't locate Ukraine on a map. Maybe knew it existed, but that's about it. There's just a tremendous illiteracy in this country for history, for geography, for anything like that. And it's hard to sell something like this to
sure.
people, especially people that are, already not doing well. How are you going to sell this, to to someone like someone on food stamps, for example, in an African American neighborhood or in, like the rural South or something like this. How do you get them to see the importance of it? There's not really a way to do that. And if you already are hating Biden, for example, um, you know, you kind of like what I've been noticing, is basically just people saying, he gives all this support to Ukraine, but we're not getting any of it. They feel left behind from it. And that's the hard thing. And this is a hard pitch. And, the thing that bothered me a lot, and it bothers me a lot about like the NAFO crowd and all that, is even many of them have never known where Ukraine was or really gave it much thought until this happened. And it's just, I mean, even if your heart's in the right place, it's like, I don't know. They have not been able to pitch it well. They tried to, and what's it going to take?
Well,
The
that's I
further
think
the further Russia goes in, I mean, we saw a number of their atrocities. I will say, I had mentioned earlier in this stream that the war was worse than I could have imagined it. But as far as like major atrocities, it hasn't been as bad as it could be, and it could get worse. But it's one of those things like, okay, when people saw Bucha or the fighting in Mariupol and Izium and all those like mass graves, like it's not. It doesn't even have the same level. Like they pitched Kosovo, as I remember, better than this, even though it turned out to be completely inflated. I remember when Kosovo was happening, like, you know, there were actually commercials comparing it, like, to making, you know, comparisons to the Holocaust. And I'm just like, you know, it was very, very bad. It had the potential to get a lot worse, but, you know, it turned out to be nowhere near as big of the catastrophe as it was. Gaza is turning out to be a much, much bigger one and much, much more insidious as time goes on.
Well, yeah, but I think I think it's not like people in the 90s or even people in the 40s were any more historically or geographically literate than they are today. Like,
They're not, yeah, but
the unengagement of the general public with a lot of the stuff is not new. It's not unique. The inability to sell, hey TK, the inability to sell these things, I think that's new, and it is a product of the media environment we live in more than anything, right? Because take Kosovo is a different story, right? Kosovo happens in the mid '90s, and the problem with this in particular is like the Kosovo War starts in the mid '90s, and we go in late '90s. Um, and you know what was brand new at this period of time, only a few years old, right? Is cable news. Fox News is very. Is Gaza likely to resolve fairly quickly? Probably not. Everyone's saying, "Oh, they're talking," and that doesn't matter. Hamas
it's
probably
not
doesn't
going to
have any
resolve.
probably doesn't have hostages left alive after 6 months of bombings, and Israel isn't going to accept that, so they're going to keep fighting. But yeah, Fox News is new in the '90s. CNN fairly new in the '90s. These things have metastasized over the last 30 years. Especially our media environment has metastasized into something really awful, really kind of like disgusting. And uh, I'll be honest, it's not a both sides thing. It's very much a one side has turned our media environment into a kind of a nightmare space of illiberalism in a very real way. I saw today Ryan Macbeth, if you're familiar with him on YouTube, uh, go, "I'm proud to work for Newsmax." And I just sat like, what the fuck, dude? Your entire thing is about misinformation, and you're like, "I'm going to work for Newsmax now." Like, are you stupid? No, what you're doing is you're taking the paycheck. I guess, okay. But now your entire project is tainted by that because Newsmax is a huge spreader of misinformation. In fact, Newsmax exists because Fox News wasn't far enough right for some people. CNN has taken a dramatic rightward shift, um, and pretending that MSNBC was ever a serious left leaning news sources only in comparison to Fox or CNN. Like, we don't have a healthy media environment anymore. And in that kind of media environment, and in that environment where lies are so frequently spread by media outlets, where opinion pieces and op-eds are printed alongside and with the same force as news articles, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to sell things anymore. Um, Charisma isn't doesn't carry the same weight as it does for a politician. And is Biden terribly charismatic? No. But by the same token, he's also not how he's presented half the time. Um, so it's hard to sell things. It's hard to even get someone to accept the basic premise of your message. And everyone is very capable of listening to what they want to hear and not having to engage with the facts on the ground. And so like I don't think it's entirely the fault of the people selling it. I think you can lay a lot of blame on Biden and the DOD in particular for being timid about this. Um, but I don't think that's the whole story.
No, I think that that's a
Like
That's a good assessment.
There's a lot to talk about, and I know people don't like to talk about the media because they get afraid to talk about the concept of freedom of speech. But like, are you is speech really free when you get down to it, guys? If is your speech free if it's controlled by moneyed interests? And more to the point, is your speech free? Like take YouTube for example. We have to be careful about what we say and do on the channel uh, in order to not get banned off of YouTube. It affects the coverage, even
Of
beyond the
course.
monetary incentive. So, like, there's a very sincere question about how much how free your speech really is, because it seems like you can only have as much freedom of speech as you can afford. And with that,
Yeah,
I want to plug our Patreon. Boop boop down below,
please.
because it does help a lot. It lets me reinvest into the channel every month or buy a pizza if I'm dying, but that's beside the point. And subscribe and like, it really does help. But like, yeah, that's a huge issue that we have right now. That this the design around our media environment is making it very hard to talk about things like, and that spills over into other discussions too. That's going to spill over into the election. That's going to spill over into Israel and Gaza, especially with the near stranglehold that uh, pro IDF people have on our traditional media outlets. The problem, like, it's very difficult to. I don't want to sound like that guy, right, who says don't trust anything, believe only me. My answer is not don't trust anything. It's that you have to spend some time. You have to take the time to see what's going on, and
You
and
have to do a lot of work to
and,
discern
and
fact from fiction now,
to
and
evaluate things, right?
information from disinformation.
And like part of this is we have gotten ourselves. Yes, TK, you definitely paid for the pizza the other day with your essay request, which I am diligently working on, in my known slow plodding fashion. But yeah, but like that gets into like you and I are in a very, I think, an advantageous position. Our education taught us to do these things by
Of course.
default. So we do that naturally, and it doesn't take as much of my energy now to do these things as it used to when I was younger and still learning how to do it. And I have a process now. But for most people, that's not the case. And for most people, it's amazing to see how quickly they all get taken for rides, right?
They do, and I think it also has to do, part of it has to do with the timing factor. It has to do with um, it has to do with like, with interest too. Just not a
Yeah,
lot of people actually are interested enough in, these events to dig deeper.
and I think you brought up a good point. Is like people are struggling, and they have been struggling for a long time. And I
Yeah,
don't want to minimize that either. And like I can see why people make that argument of why are we sending this money abroad when I need it here. And there's a lot to talk about there. Like that's a different story entirely, and kind of how states manage welfare and resources like that. That it's fucking horrendous. And it's a much
no,
larger
it is.
conversation. Um, but I can see why. But the other half of that answer is, and I kind of I'm going to give the same answer I would give to someone if they ask me why I want to spend money on NASA.
Yeah,
Right now, this is where the fighting is, right here. It's this big area. Um it's big. It's about maybe an eighth the size of Texas, which ain't nothing, but it's better than it being over here. It's better than it being over here because as you see it just gets growing and bigger and bigger and bigger. If like I said, it doesn't matter if it's not a good idea. They might do it anyway. There are opportunity costs involved in things we do in life. Not to use economic terms too much because don't talk to economist kids. It just encourages them. Uh, I, it's kind of been a thing, and I know Hetman has his thing, and he's went to Ukraine and he has roots there, and all those things that he values. But the other half of this story is kind of mine. It's like when 2014 happened, I was in a much different place about Ukraine when Euromaidan happened, and I think Hetman can attest to that. That I was
Can, yeah.
a lot more
You
skeptical
were.
of Ukraine, very skeptical of things like their far right, very concerned about what was going to come out of this, and and part of the thing about being friends with Hetman is understanding and acknowledging his obsessions and taking them on for your own. So we talked about these things and I learned about these things, and I've come to see an incredibly sympathetic view of these people. Uh, I want to see them. I want to see them have peace. Like they did a remarkable thing, even with everything that happened in Euromaidan. They threw off an incredibly difficult situation,
They did, yeah.
and at a certain level, I feel like they've earned peace. Perhaps
The way
more.
that I go ahead.
Perhaps like in a very real way, they've earned peace.
I think that they've earned it long ago, even. Um, that's my honest opinion is that Ukraine suffered enough in the 20th century that it shouldn't be having to relive these painful events. Part of that suffering too involved, these aren't distant members of my family. This is my great grandfather, my my grandfather's my grandfather's first cousin, his aunt, and many other people that I haven't been able to account for. These are people that were killed last century
Right.
in Ukraine. They're a small handful of literally, you know, if we take the whole thing, take all of the unnatural death that occurred in Ukraine, from the height of the Stalinist period to the end of World War II, you're talking a number that is, well over 10 million people. I mean, it's an astounding amount of people that died
And it's
unnatural deaths.
it's so incredibly contrasted by like so I've met a lot of Ukrainians either through you or through other contacts, right?
Yeah,
And to a person, they've been warm and welcoming people and like eager to share and reach out and talk. Um, and
they
like
are. It's very
it's a
much a part of their culture. They're very hospitable.
it's a very
Um,
like
yeah,
it's an incredible an incredible shift and difference for like someone like me, right? Particularly because I kind of took on board that Chicago attitude of scrunch up, don't fucking talk to me. I'm walking here. Um, and it's a very different approach to like interaction. And it's
of course.
refreshing. Uh,
I can give you a story. Actually, I had a friend who just recently he took his own life. He was in Ukraine. He wasn't able to serve in the army. That wasn't a factor in it, but he had some very real demons and was very very brilliant. But what I'll always remember about Ukraine, actually, you know, one of the last days I spent in Priluki, the town where my family is from. Um, Me and this guy, we just, we had split a bottle of Jägermeister and drank the whole thing, and we're just walking around the city, you know, probably around like midnight, and it's different in Ukraine. You don't really have like, I mean, now you have, of course, military curfew and stuff like that, but like at that time, you know, there's not really like police patrolling around that would bother you, and we're just walking, running into people that we knew, and then we go into a new nightclub had opened there, and it hadn't even actually opened officially to the public, but some people had been throwing a party there. probably knew the owners. And we get up there, and instantly we realize it's a private party as we're walking in, because people are trying to escort us out. And when we get to the bottom of the stairs, some of the guys who had escorted us out started to smoke cigarettes. And I realized me and one of them looked eyes at each other. And, that was my friend Vitya, Victor Koshma, which his last name's funny, but that's besides the point. But he, we'd only been friends on Facebook, but we had talked extensively. And he's like, "Oh my God, it's you! You're here!" And him and the other guys just invited us back up. And it was a birthday party, but for a little girl. But it wasn't like the little girl wasn't there. They were celebrating her. It was her parents and their friends celebrating this girl's birthday. And I was asked to give a speech. And we were treated, with food, with cake, everything. It's really easy to make friends that way in Ukraine. And when you become friends with these people, they're very, very loyal friends. I can, there are many people in Ukraine that I would, I have entrusted my life to, because, going there as a foreigner, as a foreigner from a well-to-do country, it's not always, I wouldn't say Ukraine's unsafe, but it can, it has its moments where it can be very unsafe.
There's always a concern when you're in a foreign country that you cannot necessarily read the situation the same way you can in your own country.
Of course, and you put basically your life in the hands of these, strangers at times. And being in a place like Priluki, it had a reputation in the 90s for being it was a very violent city. There were 4 different organized crime groups fighting over it. So, even now, periodically you have, remnants of that. And, being there at times, I felt very, intimidated, because it's it is a very poor place. But, that's the kind of warmth that, they have. That's the kind of, I entrusted them with my life, and they were always very good to me. But yeah, going back to it, no, I think that Ukraine does deserve peace. It's really the fact that this broke out. I mean, even when the war in Donbass, in 2014, it was horrible, it was horrific. But there was always this thought, in my mind that it can't possibly, become something worse, become something,
See,
full scale.
that's the difference between you and me. I always take the position that it could be worse. People hate when I do that.
I mean, it's the truth, though. And now I'm at the position that it could be worse than what's happening now. But in order for it to keep it from not getting worse, they need support. They need air defense. They need artillery. And I've been very lucky. I haven't lost any friends on the front. At least people that I know. There's a few people that I was talking to when I was there, and I haven't really kept in touch with. So I don't know if all of them are accounted for, but my most immediate friends, they're still alive, and I'm very grateful for that. But that can change,
Yeah, I think
just to get into to mention. I mean, we don't know the full figures of how many people have died, on both sides, but on Ukraine's, what we have documented, actually, what has been documented by third parties for Ukraine, the amount of soldiers that they've lost, it's somewhere like almost 70,000 that they've been able to actually account for.
casualties
And
like
Deaths.
Dead,
KIA.
wounded,
KIA. KIA.
Okay.
Which is very high. I mean,
Yes.
and it's probably quite a bit higher because that's just what
The
news
nature of the
outlets have
beast.
been able to actually have been able to gather. And for the BBC has had, or I don't know if it was BBC or Medusa, one of them did the same thing for Russians, and it was a very similar number. Although I've heard numbers for Russians up to 200,000 KIA.
We're probably
Which
sitting around 150.
what'd you say?
Probably sitting around 150K.
Yeah, which is astounding in
Yeah,
itself.
I think there's been a tendency to overcount Russia's casualties. They probably
No,
suffered 4 times that many wounded, but 150,000 K is probably reasonable.
I would say that's reasonable. Even if it were less, it's still astounding number.
It's still a World War II. That's not dissimilar to how many that's not dissimilar to a year of the American Civil War. So
yeah, it's like as much or slightly more than the United States lost in the Pacific theater.
Yeah. I mean,
although it might be slightly less than that actually.
A little bit.
Yeah, I thought what is the loss for the Pacific theater? I think like something like 200,000.
Pretty close. I think it's beside the point at the moment. I don't have those figures to hand. What was I going to do? Oh yeah. So we're kind of nearing the end of our ability today. Avery's about to jump off the roof. Anyway, rest of the week, Friday. What If Autist has released a video. The coming incel revolution.
Yes. This is going to be a very fun time.
We're assembling a team, a team to avenge us. But for copyright reasons, we're calling it the Revengers. To go ahead and look into this on Friday evening. Join us. It'll be fun. Actually, we're going to see me slowly lose my mind, I'm sure. It's like I said.
I can't wait to expose my special guest to this.
It's like I said. The virgin move is to become a terrorist. The Chad move is to become able to accept rejection like an adult. Next Wednesday, we will do a thing that we will decide probably right now after we hang up on all of you. And I'm going to try to reschedule the things that I keep not doing for you because I don't feel good as soon as I'm able. With that, I want to wish you all an excellent night and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it too, from the bottom of my heart.